This is the Big Stories Podcast, where we tell the amazing and inspiring stories from across the Big 12 Conference.
Hey everyone, this is Cleon Wall. Normally we would bring you an uplifting or inspiring story. And we're going to do something a little different this time. Joining me in the BYU Radio studios is Brandon Crow. He's the producer in charge of BYU TV's Big Stories. How you doing today, Brandon?
I'm doing well, Cleon. Thank you for having me in here.
I'm grateful that you get to join us. What are we going to do with this episode? I'll tell you what we're going to do with this episode. I'm not going to let Brandon tell us because he doesn't know what's going on. No, I'm the one who's in charge here, so that's why I'm going to tell you. Basically, we're going to give a brief history of Big Stories on TV and the podcast, and then we're going to talk about some of our favorite moments so far from the Big Stories brand, and then we might have one big grand question that we will answer at the end. So, Brandon, I want you to go back to the early days of Big Stories before it was even called Big Stories. I'm talking about the stuff before I even got involved. So you guys did a soft launch during BYU football's last year of independence and before they joined the Big 12. How did this all come about?
Great question. So I got hired on here at BYU TV in September of 2022. And during that time, like right before I got hired is technically when they started the launch. And so they had Travis Moore and his Mango Media team that does a lot of our Deep Blues. They went out with some BYU TV people. They went out to Baylor and to Arkansas. And so they filmed a couple stories there. And then when I came on, it was kind of too late for me to do anything in regards to a lot of the football stuff. But I was able to go out to Boise, and we did a couple stories for Boise State for the end of the season, for that football season. And then they wanted to see if we could do any for basketball. And that season, for basketball in particular, they had the, I think it was like the Beehive Classic or something like that, where they played all the in-state teams. And so they played Weber State, they played or not Southern Utah, but Utah Tech. And so we did a couple stories there, and Utah State was another one, and we started out with Utah State. That was technically like my first one, and reached out to the schools, and I was given the directive saying, "Hey, we want to tell uplifting and inspiring stories about something that's good that's going on in the school." And so I reached out to all the athletic people or the schools, essentially the school's communication staff. I said, "Hey, this is something new that we're trying to do, and we want to highlight something good that you guys are doing." And for the Utah State story, they told us about this gleaming project of what they do with the extra food that the farmers gather in the area, and they didn't want it to go to waste, and so they put it into a food shelter so they can be able to help people get food when they need it. So we did a story on that, and then down in at Utah Tech, we highlighted a lot of the science and the technology that's going on there to help people with special needs and different things, and at Weber just highlighting different stories about different people from different backgrounds who have gone to Weber State and who have found success there, and from there that was kind of like the trial and error period, I guess, for me. But then once my superiors were like, "Hey, I think he knows what he's doing a little bit here," then it was you and I. That was our first dive really into that first full season. And then they said, "Okay, now we have a full football season." And so this is February of 2023. And they wanted 2 stories for each school that we played in football that year. So they wanted one that focuses kind of like on the school, what the school's values were. And then they wanted some other sports related or sports centric story. So I had to come up with 24 stories for that first year.
Now, I'll give you a little background very quick. I get pulled into a meeting with Brandon, and it's the top brass or some of the top brass here at BYU TV. And they're like, "Hey, this is this great idea that we have, and it's called Big Stories, and this is what we're doing." And I'm like, "Wow, that sounds really cool. I wonder if we could do something with the stuff that they bring back. Can we turn that into a podcast?" And then they turn to me. This is what I remember. And Cleon, we want you to go out on some of these trips too, and we want you to find another story. Yeah. So my job was not to just grab stuff from TV, but to actually find something else for us to do. And so I'm just like, "Oh, okay." And so that first season, Brandon and I, we become travel buddies. We go to Lubbock, Stillwater, Morgantown, Ames, Fayetteville, Lawrence, Austin, and Huntsville, Texas. Brandon then went out on a few more trips, and I stayed here and had to get a few things done from back here in Provo. Season 2, we both travel, but we go our separate ways because we don't like each other. No, not really. We decided to try something different. BYU TV had their stories. I decided to go out and travel and grab stories on my own. Of course, I still had to get some stuff from BYU TV just because some of the stories that I'd come up with or that I wanted to do, they just weren't panning out. And then finally in season 3, Brandon's traveled again, and I do everything from here at BYU Radio. And also trying to do some stuff with some of the podcasters who are across the Big 12 footprint. So BYU TV is done for this season with Big Stories. I think that is correct. We are continuing on with Big Stories here on the podcast side of things. We still got plenty of stories to tell. Now, my initial thought was I wanted to talk to Brandon about just season 3, some of his best stories, but he came back to me with some stuff that he says, I kind of want to talk about some of the stories that I think, I'll put it in my words, and you can correct me. Some of the stories that meant something to me over the 3 seasons, or that had great stories that weren't told in those stories.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, I decided, hey, you know what? Let's just pick a few stories out from each season in which something meant something to us. And so I'll start out first, and I'll say season 1 for me, it was in Ames, Iowa. And we shared a story. TV got the story, but I just ripped it off from them. But we did something with Jack Trice because it had been 100 years since he had died, and the stadium was named after him in Ames, Iowa. But I also got a story about Leah Nelson and the Cycloneers. Please check out the whole episode. Basically, WVU, which is West Virginia University, they don't have a softball team. Iowa State does not have a baseball team. They started cheering for one another because of a few social media posts involving Leah, who was a Cyclone softball player at the time. Lots of good stuff, including supporting each other while the two teams were playing, both against Oklahoma State, including Iowa State singing Country Roads after their victory.
None of us knew the words to Country Roads, but somehow when the bus driver played it on the stereo system, we all knew the words, and we were all singing it, and our coach was videotaping it, tweeted it out, and that got so many likes, responses. Everyone was so excited.
Anytime you see a team celebrate, that's cool, but the Sing Country Roads started the real connection between their team and our team.
By the way, that other voice is former West Virginia baseball coach Randy Mazey. Brandon got to actually play catch with Leah.
I did. That was really cool.
As part of the interview, because I wanted the sound of the ball hitting the mitt. And Brandon's a former baseball player, so I'm sure I think he enjoyed that part.
I loved it. Yeah, it was awesome. At the time, that was the only time I'd ever been to Iowa. And I didn't know if I'd ever go back to Iowa. I didn't know if I'd be able to be close to the Field of Dreams, which we did this past year, which was crazy. But so to me, that was at the moment was like the closest thing I could get to doing a Field of Dreams thing is playing catch with a softball player in Iowa. It was awesome.
Yeah. And Leah was awesome. Please go back, season 1, listen to that whole interview. I also got to talk to Conrad Hawley, former Iowa State basketball player. That was later in season 1, and we put that out during the basketball season. By the way, we did a follow-up podcast with Conrad just a few weeks ago here in season 3. And I got a nice card from Conrad's dad because I talked to him too about Conrad and what he was doing now in his life. So
cool.
Anyway, so those were some of my favorite memories. Iowa State was a good memory. There are lots of other stories we could tell them. We won't, but those are 2 of my favorite memories. For Brandon, he wanted to talk about Thane Baker from Kansas State.
Thane Baker was cool. So a lot of the times with these stories that we end up doing, they're not necessarily our first choice. Sometimes they're not even our second, third, or fourth. What we do is we try to research, and I try to present myself. I try to do research ahead of time, and then I present the school and the contacts that I've made there, and I say, hey, we found these stories. Do you like these stories, or are we missing anything? And so with Thane Baker, I was able to find, I found it online, searching it, because they had just recently honored him during a halftime at football game at the end of 2023. So this is beginning of 2024 for basketball season. And so reached out to his people, and they signed on to have us tell his story. Thane Baker, it's an awesome story if you want to go watch it on our YouTube and on the BYU TV app. But he was a 4, so he ran in 2 different Olympics, and he ran in 4 different events, and he got 4 medals. So he was a medalist in every event that he ran in. And but there was just a lot of cool things that happened with that. He lives in Bellevue, Nebraska, which is just outside of Omaha. And so we went there in January, in the middle of January, and it was negative 25 degrees, and they had snowstorms every day, and we just had little Chrysler Pacificas that we were trying to go through the snow skiffs in. And he lived in a cul-de-sac on the same street as his daughter, Catherine. And then his son, who lived in Arkansas, had driven up so that we could interview him. And it was just a really touching experience. He's in his 90s, and we were able to go there. We met him. He wakes up every day, still does his exercises. And while we were interviewing him, I was sitting on the floor in his kitchen, and his son was next to me. His son's in his 50s. And he leans over to me halfway through the interview, and he whispers in my ear, he says, "Hey, can I have this interview footage of my dad?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, he shared stuff with you guys just barely that I've never heard him share before. He's never told us any of this stuff. And he was just a very spiritual man, very inspirational man, just an honest, good man. And it was one of those things where you're hoping for something when you go and sit down in the interview. And then once he starts opening up, you realize, oh, this is going to be awesome. And then you end up walking away with stuff that you didn't even think was gonna happen. My favorite moment in that is he, midway through his interview, he's telling a story about there was a gentleman that he used to know and was acquainted with.
He used to pass around a bag of marbles and said, "Everybody take a marble." He says, "Carry that marble with you. If somebody has rubbed you the wrong way or something, take that marble out and think about the good things about that person. Think about the good things in life that you have the opportunity to take advantage of, and think about it and hold that marble." I still got the marble. Because there's good in everybody, there's good in everything. And if it takes a marble to remind you of it, get a marble.
And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an actual marble, and he said, "This is the same marble that I've had for all these years." And ever since then, my director buddy, Zane Oakwin, who was on that story, him and I both have marbles that we carry in our pockets and things, just as a reminder of that. And it was super inspiring. But the fact that we were trudging around in knee-high depths of snow, negative 25 degrees, didn't matter because Thane warmed and melted all of that away.
Season 2, you have 2 experiences that you picked out. Why don't we have you talk about the first one, Wyoming and J.C. Hupp.
J.C. Hupp was phenomenal, and it was truly a humbling and life-changing thing for me, for our director Jack Murgist, for David Holliday, and for Stephen Bartholomew, our camera guys, who are all part of that trip. So Wyoming was a non-conference game for BYU. And we reached out to several different people. We wanted to talk about Josh Allen, but his people were too busy. And then we had a couple of different ideas, but eventually we actually reached out to a former employee here, Caitlin King, and her husband, Spencer King. They live in Wyoming, and Caitlin used to do stuff with the athletic department there. And so she said, "Well, we have a rodeo team here." And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome. That is so quintessential Wyoming." So she gave us contacts, reached out to them, and then I started talking with via text their coach, Seth Klaus, and he said, "You should really talk and focus on my assistant coach, J.C. Hupp." And so, not trying to give anything away, but JC, she was an all-star rodeo cowgirl herself, growing up in South Dakota, came from a family that grew up just doing all that stuff. Her older brother, her older sister did the same thing. Her family had their own corral with horses and all that. But they suffered a family tragedy where eventually the mom, dad was lost. Her niece Harper was lost in a tragic house explosion. And then her nephew also was going through cancer treatments at the time. And so we reached out to her, and it had not even been a full year really yet since all that happened. And she said yes, only after we had a phone call with her. And I remember I was on the road, and I was in Houston, Texas, and my director, Jack Murgis, was here in Provo, and we did a 3-way call with JC. And she said, I want to do this story, but I'm hesitant because we've been kind of burned in the past when it comes to local media and how they told their story. And I just remember this is a faith-based institution here at BYU. And when I try to go through and research these stories, I try to be prayerful with it. And I was just open, upfront, and honest with her. And I said, look, JC, I said, we try to treat these stories with the utmost respect. And all we want to do is we want to be able to help showcase how you were able to go through something so tragic, but you were able to rely on your faith in Jesus Christ and how that was able to help you get through this stuff. It wasn't going to take any of your pains away, but it was going to be able to strengthen you and help you get through that. And then she said, and while we were on the phone call, she got emotional and she stopped and she said, I apologize for getting emotional. And I said, is everything okay? And so then she said, my dad used to always point out jackrabbits to us. And he would, even though they might be pests to a lot of people, he would try to tell us not to kill or take out the jackrabbits. And she said, as I'm talking with you on the phone, and as you explained what you wanted to do, I looked out the window and I saw a jackrabbit. And so she said, to me, that was a sign from my dad giving me the okay that I should do this. And then that opened up the door for us to go. And she and her sister Taryn were absolute just sweethearts. And while we were there, me and Jack, we love old Western movies, and just being out there filming her on her horse, it was just beautiful. But her niece Harper, who passed away, her favorite color was pink. And so JC would talk about how whenever she sees the color pink, that she thinks about her niece Harper. And we really tried to set up this last final shot. It's the last final shot you'll see in the piece, and it's our ode to all the Westerns, especially to True Grit. And we filmed it where she is riding on her horse on the horizon line. And our camera crew, and Jack, I'm not joking. They literally, we drove in the most random spot so we can get the horse in the right spot. And there were thousands of mosquitoes out there. And they fought through all the mosquitoes to get this shot. And we were so focused on making sure that, JC came through the frame in the right way that it wasn't until after we went back and we looked at the shot that we got that the sky was pink. And not only was the sky pink, but the horse she was riding was the horse that her father gave her. And she was moving forward, and her mom's mantra to her was to be the buffalo, go into the storm, and ride on. And so it was just a culmination of everything about her story. You have Harper's pink sky, the horse that her dad gave her, and she's riding on and she's plowing forward, doing what her mom told her to do. It was just a beautiful thing, Cleon.
God has a plan. I don't always appreciate his storytelling. My team definitely shows up in different ways. One of the boys on the team, actually, he lost his father about 3 years ago. He texted me on Christmas and just said, I know it's your first one without your parents. And he was thinking of me, even though he was missing someone that day too.
I was fortunate enough to get all the footage and all the interviews, and I turned that into a podcast episode. I was also able to do a podcast episode about Arizona State University's Tony Akil. He is a hockey player. I'm sorry, but when I think of Arizona State, I don't think hockey.
Right.
So when you first presented this, oh yeah, we're going to do this story on a hockey player, and my first thought was, wait, ASU has a hockey team? So I'm just, so I was really intrigued. I'm like, well, what is this story about? And he's not even from Arizona. He is from Hockey Central at least one of the Hockey Centrals in the United States, I should say, one of them. And so it was great to hear Tony's story. I want to know, how did you find out about Tony?
Again, just doing a ton of research and reaching out to their athletic communications team. And I was, typing in Arizona State inspirational stories, and I was surfing, and with these stories, I try to cast a big net, and I try to make it diverse. And I'm not trying to do each story about, football or basketball. And, I grew up, watching hockey in Southern California, watching my LA Kings and everything. And I, too, was intrigued, just like Wyoming with the rodeo team. That's different. And then Arizona State having a hockey team in the desert. I mean, that's awesome. And so then I came across this article about Tony Akil and about how he, battled cancer as a youth. And then he was able to overcome that. And now he's playing collegiate hockey. And so I found that article, and then I reached out to their athletic staff, and And they're like, oh yeah, Tony's awesome, and he would love to do that. And then I come to find out he has his own foundation that he's trying to give back to kids and give back to people. And then reaching out to his family, and they were so cool. They were so awesome. Kelly, his mom, was so rad, and they back in Boston, and I'd never been there before. And so I was like, oh, the opportunity to go back east, let's go. And so we went out there, and that was an awesome story. But I think some of the things that happened outside of the story really stood out to me for that one. Or the dad, Bob, his mom, Kelly, when we showed up to the house, she was like, he hates this stuff. He doesn't want to do any of this stuff. And so we didn't even bring our cameras in for a while. We just wanted to sit down and just talk with him. And my dad was an LA County sheriff, and Bob and Tony's younger brother are also police officers in the Boston area. And so we're just talking to him about that, we're talking about all this stuff. And then so he said, we'll come back tomorrow and we'll film your interview. And so then he was like, okay. And then the next day when we came back, Kelly was like, Bob couldn't stop talking about you guys. And, that's super rare, all this stuff. And we're like, awesome, cool. And in the interview, Kelly said that they're like, we're not overly religious people, but we do feel like that there's something bigger than us that helped us get through this thing. And that moment always stood out to me, just because, like, again, we're not trying to convert people on these trips. We're meeting people where they are and celebrating these people where they are. We've done stories on Muslims, on Jews, on Christians, whatever it is. We're not trying to segregate or anything. We're just trying to just tell these stories about people doing good and trying to do their best. And to hear that from his mom was really cool.
Yeah. And the name of the episode was Until the End, We Defend. And that was from one of his youth hockey coaches.
We had kind of a mantra, and it's all my teams. It's been with me since I started coaching, and it's until the end, and then the players respond, we defend. Now that can be about sports, right? But it means so much more than that.
Did you even know anything about that? Or when he says that, they were like, oh, wait, that's what our episode's going to be be about.
So Pinch, his hockey coach, was another miracle of that trip. Like, we had no clue who the heck he was. And it wasn't until after we were talking with his mom while we were there, and where she's like, do you guys, like, how much time do you guys have here? And I said, well, we scheduled out, X amount of days. And she goes, you have to reach out to Pinch. And we don't want to tell Tony because he means so much to Tony. And if you can, it would be awesome if you're able to reach out to him and be able to interview him. So that way when Tony watches the piece, that he can be like, oh, what? So Pinch actually lives up in Maine. And so we reached out. So through Kelly, we got his phone number. We reached out to him, told him what we were going to do. And he was all on board. And so we drove from Boston all the way up to Maine. Beautiful drive. Went up there. And where Pinch lives, there's this tree, which is a whole nother story. But it's this tree. I can't remember the exact name of the tree, but he calls it the Tree of Life tree because it's right by his house. It's in this huge park that overlooks like the harbor, and I guess it's the only tree of its kind that survived out of all of the other trees in that area that they had like an infection and all this stuff. But it's the only tree that survived. And just the way that it looks, it just looks cool. And so what Pinch would say was that he would take a picture of that tree and he'd send it to his team, his youth hockey players, and he would remind them with inspirational things. And then in the middle of his interview, we had him sitting on this bench in this park with that tree behind him. And then in the interview, he busts out this thing. He's like, yeah, one thing that I always tell our team, until the end, and then they come in and say, we defend. And then as soon as he told that story, like all of us, behind the scenes, like I remember our audio guy, Jack, he like looked over at me at the corner of his eye. And then Zane, our director, like put his hand on my leg. And all of us were like, okay, that's it. Boom.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I also want to bring up an ASU story that I did in season 2. It's with Maddie McLaughlin. She's a former Sun Devil volleyball player. She got really sick in high school, quit playing volleyball after the 9th grade, didn't pick it back up again until she was a senior in high school, pushed hard to finally get to ASU, and eventually she became a pro volleyball player. It was an amazing story of perseverance, and she was just fun to talk to. Her family was fun to talk to. Her coach was fun to talk to. And the great part about it was, because I did talked to her, I found out more about her coach, and I did a big story on her coach too, who has a pretty cool story of going from the world of high finance to becoming the head volleyball coach at ASU. So really
cool.
Really, really cool. Okay, season 3, I'll just say this season we've tried to do some episodes with podcasters from across the Big 12. Our first episode of the week, it deals with what's going on the field, and we try to interview different podcasters. And the second episode is the inspirational story. Well, as I was researching podcasters, I came across Cody Stovall, and he's with the Locked On Oklahoma State podcast. And as I was trying to do any research on him, I found out he was missing a leg, and I'm like, there's got to be a story there. And so I would just say, go listen to that story. He's got a great story to tell. It's truly remarkable that after what happened to him, after losing his leg, he went from what he was doing in the past, which was working in the oil fields, being a car salesman, to being a podcaster.
I didn't have that, right? I didn't have a resume. I didn't finish my degree. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a broadcaster. So I just started getting on my phone and making videos and just sending them to Locked On.
Cody admitted to the Locked On team that he didn't have what they were looking for. But he also told them,
I know you're not going to find very many people that understand Oklahoma State historically the way that I do. And I have a bit of the tism when it comes to remembering statistics. I didn't think that I was going to get the job. I'm just going to be 100% realistic with you. Eventually, they were like, you know what? This is different.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty interesting. One real quick, Brandon, other one I want to share with you. I want to mention one of our more recent episodes. It's with the Arizona soccer goalkeeper, Olivia Ramey. She wants to be a sports psychologist. And the reason why is because her sister suffered through anxiety and depression as a competitive swimmer. And so I was able to talk to both of them. Olivia, when she came to Provo with her team, and I didn't get very long with her. I maybe got like 20 minutes with her. And I wanted to interview her again, but it didn't turn out. But I talked to her sister for like 45 minutes about her experience. And it's amazing what we can do when we put our faith in God, but also when we look for help from other people. And when we do that, and sometimes we have to get rid of things in our lives. For Rachel Ramey, she had to stop swimming so that she stopped having these problems with mental health. And she's in a much better place now. And how her sister says, I see what you went through. I know what you went through. And now I want to help other people so that they don't go through those same things. So I thought it was a really cool story. You did something really cool with former NFL player and former UCF running back, Latavius Murray. You know, he did a lot of good things with UCF, did good things in the NFL, but the story you tell is the amazing thing he's doing for a friend of his.
Latavius was really cool. I mean, I had him on my fantasy football team a couple times, and when it comes to these stories, like just because I've grown up in the world of sports, sometimes I just know, that some people went to these Big 12 schools. And so when I remember that Latavius Murray went to UCF, and I reached out to the UCF contacts who are awesome, they're like, oh yeah, Latavius, he's great. He comes around and he responds. So I was like, awesome. So they put me in contact with him, and then he reached out and said, yeah, I'd love to be a part of it. And I said, are there any events or things that you're doing that we can come and capture video footage of? And so he said, I'm having a fundraiser for the center that we're building in May. Can you guys come out? And so this was like in March, I think we were talking. And so we said, absolutely, we'd love to. So it was the beginning of May. And so we head out there, and he was a busy guy, and he's a busy dude with schedule like down to the minute. And so we showed up, and the very next morning is when he was going to meet with us, and we're going to go to his childhood home in Nedrow, New York, which is outside of Syracuse. So we show up, and then it's this cool little town, and he starts talking to us outside of his house. He's like, "This is where I grew up. This is where, me and my buddy, Tez and Coop and John. This is where we all were." And then, sure enough, he had already told Tez, and so Tez comes around the corner, and then Tez pops out, and we get footage of them, and then they talk with us about the relationship that they had with John Diaz, one of their friends, childhood friends. And So right now, Latavius Murray is building a center, kind of like a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club, called the John Diaz Center, and he's naming it after his friend John Diaz, who was tragically killed just a couple days after or before Thanksgiving, about 7 years ago. And John meant so much to Latavius and to the community that he thought it was only apt to be able to name this center after him. And it was just a very touching and heartwarming thing to hear on the outside. And then once we got there, we started realizing how really involved and in the roots of this whole community this group of boys were. And so they said that they never had a center for kids or anything like that growing up. They said when they grew up, they were just all playing on the streets, and that there was never like a designated place for community kids to get together outside of school. And so Latavius, he said, we had a couple different interviews with him, but the one that we loved the most was when we got him alone in the locker room at UCF, and he really started to open up to us about how he had an experience with a guy named Mike Hart, who was from that area, who went on to be successful at Michigan. And he saw how when he was successful and how much he looked up to him, and he's like, hey, it's possible to do something cool from this place. And so that really set, something inside of him. And then in the interview, Latavius got super emotional and he started crying.
I felt helped shape me as a kid. I know the things that helped me in my journey along the way. And so it's only right that I'm able to try to recreate those and give those back if I can. If it's one kid in there that you leave your mark with, that's what it's all about. You can't really ask for much more than that.
What was crazy about that, Cleon, is one of the things I wanted to bring up with that was that there are so many different little miracles and tender mercies that happen with all of these shoots. And one of the ones with this one is, one of the reasons why he wanted us to come out there in May was that he had this fundraising gala. And they were going to have a ton of people, like big people, Congress people, from the state of New York that were there and everything, trying to raise money to help get more funds for this center. And so we had all of our camera gear. We were all ready to go. We show up to the gala. We're filming it. We're feeling the adrenaline. And then we had the next day planned as almost just like a break day, which was a Sunday. And then we were going to head out and leave to our next destination on Monday. And so we had extra time on that Sunday. And as we're at the gala, we had already interviewed Latavius's. We interviewed Latavius outside of his home. We followed him to his elementary school, which was awesome. Seeing him interact with all the little kids, and he said, "I was just like you." It was awesome. But his best friends Coop and Tez were there, and they took us to the center, to the site. They haven't done any groundbreaking yet, but they have a sign out there. And then they went out into the field. And, our crew was awesome. Jack, James, Steven, and then Joe, our audio guy. They gave the friends some space. And next thing you know, Cooper gets really emotional. And he starts saying, he's like, I feel John with us here. And he said, essentially to the point of, what we're doing here is going to outlast all of us.
Kids are going to grow up saying they went to the John Diaz Community Center forever. His name's going to live on.
And so fast forward to the gala, which was the next night, and we're there, and we see Cooper and Tez, and we give them hugs, and we say hello. And then they say, hey, John Diaz's mom and dad are here. Latavius's mom is here. You guys should try and talk to them. And so we're like, whoa, okay, sure. And so sure enough, we go over there, and I introduce myself to John Diaz's lovely mom and dad. And then me and my partner, our director, Jack Murgis, we tell him, essentially, this is what we want to do. And do you have any time tomorrow? And they said, yeah, absolutely. Come on over. We'd love to talk about our son. And then we talked to Latavius's mom, and she says, yeah, you can come on over tomorrow. And so essentially the next day, we ended up interviewing Cooper and Tez together. We interviewed a superintendent who used to be a principal at the school that John Diaz, Coop, Tez, and Latavius were all at. And then we interviewed Latavius's mom, And so we got 4 interviews out of going to the gala, when we thought that the gala was something that we were going to use in the actual thing, but we didn't. And so we got these 4 miracle interviews that ended up being wonderful. And it was just this poetic thing that we do in the piece, and Jack is so awesome for it. But John Diaz, he's one of these guys that he just had a soft spot for animals and for stray things. And so he would see these animals walking around that didn't have a collar or anything, and he would take them into his house. And his parents were like, "Hey, John, are you going to take this to the shelter or something?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, sure. I will, Mom." And they still have him at the house to this day, and they never got rid of him. And so it was a poetic thing where we start the story off with Latavius talking about that, where he remembers coming home from prom night, and his buddy sees a cat, takes the cat in, and the parents still have the cat. But you have a guy that is looking out for other people so much that he takes in stray animals. And then at the very end, we talk about how the center for these essentially stray kids or kids that need a place to go is going to be named after John Diaz, the guy that was looking out for other people and other things. It was awesome.
So this is the part where I'm going to plug. Please, please, please go and watch all of the big stories, whether you go to BYUSN.com or you go to YouTube and watch big stories there. There are great stories from BYU TV. I'll plug myself a little bit. I think we have some pretty good stories for BYU Radio when it comes to, big stories, the podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. We're going to end on one last question. Brandon, I'm going to ask you this first, and then I'll answer it too. What does the big stories brand mean to you, and how has it changed? How has it changed you since you've been doing these big stories?
That's a great question. Before I answer that question, I just want to give you a lot of props, Cleon. I see you work so hard, and you pour your whole heart and soul into what you do. And so another plug from me, and he's blushing right now because he didn't know I was going to say this, but Cleon,
we might be editing this out, by the way.
Cleon does a lot of stuff, and so the Big Stories podcast stories are awesome. If you haven't listened to all of them, go ahead and listen to them, because Cleon really does so well in talking with these people and getting their stories out and getting them stories told properly and in the right way. So kudos to you, brother.
That is very nice of you.
But in response to your question, before I got this job, I was working in sales. I was doing insurance. I even worked for the state of Utah during the COVID pandemic, where I was helping people get their food stamps and benefits. And it was so stressful, and it was just really just soul sucking, to be honest. Like, I would get blamed for families that, didn't have food and all this stuff, and it was just crazy. And as much as I tried to help those people, I still did not feel fulfilled. And when I got this job and I started going out in the field, and I started sitting down with these people and listening to their stories, I felt so fulfilled in having just a small, little itty bitty part in helping tell their stories of inspiration, of hope, and faith and positivity and resilience through trial, being able to share that with other people, so that if other people come across these stories, that they too can find hope, resilience, and strength in their difficulties. And so it has become so fulfilling and so life-changing, to be honest. I know sometimes we throw that phrase around, and it's become a little cliche, I don't know, but for me, it really has changed my life. And it's given my life a whole new meaning and a whole different perspective on things that I go through. And I draw inspiration from these people that I meet. And a lot of them I still keep in contact with, and I'm still text and things. And so, like, me, Jack, and the Hupp sisters, we still have a group text. And whenever we see a pink sky, Jack and I will take a picture and we'll send it to them, and they'll respond and things like that. And the big stories means a lot to me. It does. It helps me. I already talked about it making me feel fulfilled, but I think at its core, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, but I genuinely feel like it's the most pure Christian thing that we can do, that we're doing here at this company. And I say that in the fact of, the sole purpose is to help inspire, uplift, and bring communities and families together. That's one of the mission statement here at BYUtv. And I feel like when we go out in the trenches, so to speak, and we find these people who have gone through tragedy, and we find these people who have been able to overcome that, and we're able to capture that story and be able to share that with other people, we are not only helping those people get through what they're going through, but we're also helping other people get through that. In a way, it's almost like an act of service a little bit. And when you think about it that way, it just means so much. And I feel like the big stories really are special. And it's really hard to put into words just how meaningful they are.
I'll be brief. I mean, I feel a lot of the same ways you do. I think the best thing that I have, or what it's meant most to me, is when I meet these people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can read their stories, we can see videos about them or whatever, but when you actually meet these people, and by the way, these people, some of them are God-fearing, some of them are not. But the thing is that when you meet these people, it's amazing to see what they've been through
Mm-hmm.
or what they've done with their lives and how they're inspiring other people. And I mean, if no one else listens to the podcast, I just keep telling myself, this is really cool that I get to meet them and I get to ask them questions and that I can benefit from this. I don't know if anyone else is going to, but I'm sure going to benefit from this. And so I think it's changed me in a way where it's just like, I love telling people stories and I love being able to tell these stories, how they're able to overcome or to just do great things with their life and to be able to share that with people. And the other thing I love, and it's not, maybe it's a little self-aggrandizing. Is that the right word? Anyway, but when they come back and they either say one of two things, thank you so much. And the second thing is, I can't believe you guys are doing this for us.
Yeah.
You know, because you're from BYU.
Yep.
We're like, yeah, who cares? We don't care. We don't care that you're with UCF, or we could even say the University of Utah. We've had some really, really good stories with the University of Utah. And we love it. We just love being able to tell these great stories. So it has changed me, and I hope it continues to change me, whether it's with Big Stories or with other projects we do with BYU Radio. Brandon, thanks for joining us here on Big Stories, and we really appreciate all the hard work that you do. And next year, I'm sure we'll have even bigger stories. I don't know. We've been doing it for 3 seasons now, so I don't know how much bigger we can get. But you know, we're going to hopefully find some good stories. Any last words before we end?
No, thank you again, Cleon, for having me on and for helping me take a step back and reflect and go through the last couple of years with this. And the Big Stories, they're awesome. The Big Stories podcast and the Big Stories stories that we do, the video ones together, it's an awesome thing. And it's a train that's going to continue to keep on moving, and the train requires no ticket. So come on board, and we'll keep trying to tell the stories the best way that we can.
Choo-choo.
Choo-choo.
Thank you very much for joining the Big Stories podcast. Thank you to Brandon Crow. Big Stories is a production of BYU Radio.